One of the great things about Footbag is that you don't need very much equipment to play. All you need are some shorts, a pair of shoes, and a footbag. Now, what do you do if you don't have a footbag? Well, you could go out and buy one from many of the professional stitchers online, or you could try your hand at making one of your own. Today I'm going to show you how to make your own 32-panel footbag. Now, some of the things that you need to make a footbag are right here in front of me. First, let's start off with the basics. Of course, you're going to need some fabric. Here I have two colors, blue and gray. Then you're going to need a template for your panels. You're going to need a pentagon and a hexagon with short sides and long sides. And these can be printed out from a link below this video. You're going to want to trace those with a pen onto your fabric and cut them out using sharp scissors. I recommend these because they have small blades and are easy to cut around the sharp corners. Now, when you're actually stitching, you're going to need a tough polyester thread with a glover's needle. And these needles are specially made with a very sharp tip in order to go through leather and ultra suede, which is what this fabric is. When you're choosing fabric, there are many different color choices. This is all ultra suede light, and you can get it from Fields Fabrics. It's a very tough synthetic leather, and it has a fuzzy side and a rougher side. For this bag that I'm making, I chose two colors, a gray and a blue, and it's going to be a fairly simple pattern, just like a soccer ball, very traditional. One thing about these colors is you will notice that the gray is a lot thicker than the blue, and oftentimes when you have a soccer ball pattern like this, it makes sense to have the thicker gray fabric as a pentagon and the thinner blue as your hexagons, because that'll make the bag much rounder and it'll make it play more consistently. When you finish stitching the bag, you're going to want to fill it, and for that you have a metal fill and a scale. I just like to use a cheap scale that I got off the internet. And lastly, to gather, you're going to want some super glue and a gathering tool. This is just a 11/32 socket wrench, and I just found that to be the proper diameter. In my demonstration today, I'm going to be using some other materials. I like to mix up my fill with different metals just to give the bag a different feel. And I will also be using these stamps that I made in order to speed up the process of tracing out all the panels. Now, when you start tracing out these panels, you want to make sure that you're tracing them out on the right side of the fabric. How do you tell what the right side of the fabric is? Well, you look at the fabric here and it has a lighter side and a darker side. And the same thing with the gray. You have a darker side and you have a slightly lighter side. And you always want to mark on the dark side because that'll be on the inside of the bag when you're finished. Since we're doing gray pentagons, we're going to want to have 12 of these marked out on our gray fabric and 20 of these guys marked out on our blue fabric. I'm going to use my stamps just to make this a little bit faster. When you're cutting out these panels, you want to make sure that you cut very straight and right along the outside of the line, because if you cut these panels a little bit crooked, it will affect how your bag comes together, and some of the panels may be uneven and they won't shape up very well. Although in the end the bag will still be playable, it just won't look as nice. And there we go, we have one panel cut, 31 left. Now that we have our 32 panels cut, I'm going to cover a few basics about stitching. So in stitching you have something called bite. Now, bite is when you have a panel, say we have a hexagon, and we have our stitching line going along like this. Bite is how far you stitch from the edge of the panel into it. This would be your bite. I usually like to have about 1/8 inch between the edge of the panel and my stitches. Another important thing about how you stitch is how even your spacing is. So say this is the edge of your panel right here, and you start stitching from right here. If this is going to be a 3-stitch and this is the pentagon side, you're going to want to have 6 holes that your needle makes in that panel. You're going to come in with your thread and your needle from the opposite side, come through like that, then come out to the other side, come through here, back out, through here, and then out again. Now these distances right here are very important. They need to be kept the same in order for your bag to have a consistent look and feel to it. And a lot of beginner stitchers have trouble with this. All it takes is practice, and after a few bags, you should be able to have a good looking bag that plays well, and your stitches will be more consistent. Okay, now we're ready to start stitching. What you want to do first is take about 2 feet of thread, maybe a little bit more, and cut it off. Then we're going to go and thread the needle and kind of take that end, pinch it between your 2 fingers, and rotate the needle so it creates a kink in the string. And this will keep this loose end from pulling it through when you're stitching. So first off, you start by taking 2 panels and putting their light sides together like so that your darker sides, the less fuzzy sides, are facing out. And you want to grip them between 2 fingers on your non-stitching hand. I prefer to use my middle finger and my thumb, it's just a thing of habit. And you always want to start on the hexagon side. And then you go about 1/8 inch away from the corner, and you start your stitch. And you go through, pull through on the first stitch, leave about 2 inches hanging, and you come through around the back. And there you go, there's your first stitch. And then repeat this so that you have 3 stitches that appear on the pentagon side of your bag. And remember to keep your stitch size consistent as well as your bite. That's usually what ends up making a good bag. So now, as you can see, we have finished the 3 stitches from the pentagon side, and they all have a consistent bite, and they are all about the right size. And if you turn it over, you have 2 loose ends going out on the hexagon side. One of them is still attached to your needle. And that is how you have your first 2 panels done. And there we go. Now, the way you add the second panel, you want to grab another hexagon from your pile. Once again, 2 light sides up, and you want to end up aligning it so that these corners will match on the hexagon. And at that point, what you do is you just add 1 more stitch just through the 2 hexagons. Leave the pentagon out of it, right through the corner, like this, and then pull the thread through. And sometimes this guy will get in the way, but that's not a problem. And then, once you have that stitch through, that is going to be your bleed hole. This is where, if your bag gets old and starts leaking, you can always open this bleed hole up and add more filler into it later. Don't stitch through them. Stitching through bleed holes sucks. And then after that, you just go on and stitch this side shut. And you'll repeat this pattern until you have all 5 hexagons attached to your pentagon. And once you have your 5th hexagon surrounding your pentagon on, and you just want to close it off, you go and stitch the last bleed hole. Come on through like that. You should go through your first panel that you stitched, pull through, and then just cut it off about an inch or 2. And there you go. You have 1 pentagon and 5 hexagons around it. Your next step is going to be to add another pentagon to this flower that we've already made. Once again, the light sides go together, and I just like to grab one of the hexagons, any one, since this is the first flower that we've made, and line it up like that, and start your stitch like you did with the first one. Start it out in the corner and come through, leaving a little tail, and just keep going then from one side to the next. Now the tricky part with this is once you have one pentagon done and you're adding another pentagon to it, you always have to check to see if there's another hexagon, whether you have to add a new one from your pile, or if there's already one existing there that's right next to it. So you have to look adjacent to the hexagon that you're stitching right now, and as you can see, we have an adjacent one that is ready to be stitched. So what you do is you just line it up again, like you would if you were adding another one, and you just start stitching right through it again, just like you did for every other hexagon that you just stitched. And now that you've got that one finished, you'll see that we don't have an adjacent hexagon stitched onto the first pent, onto this one. So it looks like we need to add another one from our pile. So we'll just grab another hex, light side to the light side, line it up, grab it, and stitch through the bleed hole. And off we go again until this hexagon is attached to the pentagon right here, and this pentagon has 5 hexagons around it. And then what you do is you just repeat this process until the center pentagon that you started with ends up with 5 pentagons around it, like so. And after that, you go ahead and keep adding more pentagons until you have run out, except for 1 pentagon. 1 pentagon should always be left. Well, if you've made it this far, you should only have 1 panel left, and your bag should look like this. It should have 5 sides of hexagons just fitting into the center, and the rest of it should be more or less a sphere. Now it's time to gather. Gather is a very important part of a foot bag because it can pretty much determine whether the bag is rolly, whether it stalls well, whether it holds its shape. So if you mess up this part, you could potentially mess up a perfectly fine bag if you gather too much or gather too little. The proper amount of gather really depends on the size of your panels, how much you bite, and how close your stitching is. So it's more of a thing of trial and error, really. I have found that something about this size does a good job with the size panels that I do and the amount of bite that I use. Now, to gather this bag, we're going to pick one of these pentagons, and we're going to find the two strings that we left, the two ends that we left cut out, and we're going to take them and we're going to pull on them simultaneously and kind of hold the edge. And this should give kind of a bunched up pentagon. Now into that bunched up pentagon, you're going to want to insert your gathering tool and let it sit there, and then take your two loose ends, which should be a little bit longer now, pull them tight, and then just give it a simple knot and tie them off. And pull tight just to make sure that all your knots are consistent. Repeat the knotting process about 3 or 4 times. Now that you have a few knots built up right there, you can go ahead and put a small dab of super glue on there, just to make sure that those knots really stick and so that they don't come apart as you're playing with the bag. I've had that happen a few times, and it's not a very good feeling. So just put a small dab of super glue on there, and after that, all you have to do is just snip it, and there you go. There is one panel gathered. Take out the gathering tool and just repeat this for the rest of the 11 panels that you have. Alright, so now you've made it this far and you've only got one panel left and your bag is gathered. It should look a little bit scrunched up, don't worry. Once you turn it inside out, it'll look much better. But don't turn it inside out just yet. You still have to finish the last panel. Now, the way you're going to do this last panel is just like you've done every other panel before. You just line it up and start the stitch as you'd usually do it. Except for this one, what I'd recommend doing is not doing the last edge. So you'd go around all the way around here like this, and then stop right there. Because the last edge you're going to want to do a special way in order to be able to flip the bag inside out with the stitching complete. Once you've done all the stitches except for this one side, you just go through the bleed hole as you usually would. And for the rest of these stitches on this last side, you would go ahead and not pull through all the way, so you'd want to leave a little loop every time you make a stitch. You're still going to do the same number of stitches, but you're just not going to close them. So I like to leave like that much. And just do that for the other side until you finish that whole side. And this will give you a little bit of extra room to play with when you're turning the bag inside out, which sometimes can be a hassle, depending on the thickness of the material and how tightly you stitched it. And for the final stitch, just close out the bleed hole. And you can remove the thread from the needle. And there you go. It should look a little bit sloppy with these edges coming out, but that's alright. Okay, now for the tricky part, flipping this bag inside out. What you want to do is you want to locate that last bleed hole that you stitched and open it up by pulling on the 3 corners of the panels very carefully. So it should open up in a bit of a triangle like that. And then I like to take a blunt object, a pencil will do, and push the bag from the other side through that hole. You're going to want to use a good bit of force on this. Just be careful not to pop any stitches, and just kind of force that bag through the hole as you spread it. And once you get it started, you can remove the pencil and just use your fingers to grab and pull while you go around in a circle around that opening. And after a little bit of effort, your bag will now be inverted. It doesn't look very pretty right now, but that's just fine. We're not quite finished yet. So what you want to do right now is locate the two ends. Hopefully they should still be coming through that bleed hole. And you want to locate them. And taking a sharp object, even I guess your scissors will do just well. You want to find that bleed hole which you just inverted everything through. And you'll see that there is two parallel stitches visible. In the end, you want these two ends to come out in between these two stitches through the bleed hole. And right now they're not doing that, these two ends are just kind of hanging out over here in between the three corners, and that's not good. So what you want to do is you want to lift this one bleed hole stitch and pull these two underneath and into the bleed hole and pull it through like that. So now as you see, you have the two bleed hole stitches right there and right there, and you've got the two loose ends coming out in between them. That is critical. You have to do that, otherwise your bag will not gather properly. Now the next step is to fill your bag with your filler. This requires a scale and also whatever fill you intend to use. I like to mix it up between lead shot and some flat stainless steel discs, and I feel like that gives the optimal performance of the bag. So the way you do this is you find that bleed hole with the two leads coming out, and you just take a pencil and poke it a little bit larger, spread it out a bit so you can easily put the fill into there, like so. And then turn on your scale, wait for it to zero out. So I like to fill my bags with about 20 grams of this stainless steel flat disc fill. And then I'll fill up the rest of it with the lead shot that I have. And in the end, the bag should end up weighing about 65 or 66 grams. And I find this to be the optimal weight for a foot bag of this size. Now you're going to want to gather that last panel. This is a little bit tricky sometimes, so it takes a few tries to get used to it. You would want to go ahead and pull on one of the strings and gather one side, and pull on the other and gather on the other side. And you can see that it really bunched up the panel a lot, so you just want to spread it out a little bit. This is mostly done by feel. Once you make a certain amount of bags, you more or less get it right, but I like to eyeball it and make it so that the panel is gathered a little bit more than the surrounding panels, as you can see right there. And what this does is when I tie the knot outside, I then pull the knot into the inside of the bag, and that gives the panel a little bit more room to expand and be the same size as its surrounding panels. Now I go ahead and I'll tie the knot out here. You just have to be careful not to let the knot go to the inside of the bag. And I'll make a few knots here. And as always, seal it with a little bit of super glue. And now just cut these ends. You can throw away whatever string you have remaining. And then just use a pencil to push that tail inside. And there you have it, folks. Your very own 32 panel foot bag. Now go outside, kick it around a bit, and have some fun. Hope you guys learned something.